Hello, hello, hello! Welcome to Synergetic Games. Today we are going to be reading Kingdom by the Sea by Robert Westall because it is Storytime Saturday. And yes, I'm going to wear my hoodie because I enjoy my hoodie. It has been wet and awful and just we've had a terrible storm. For those of you who don't know, in the UK there has been a storm and it has a name. It's that bad. It has a name. It's called Storm Eunice. That's the... I don't know why, but a lot of storms and a lot of tornadoes that I've heard about in the past have like really old-fashioned names, and I can't quite figure out why this storm in particular is called Storm Eunice. Maybe it's an annual thing. I don't know, but it ripped a great big hole, or several, in the London O2 Stadium. For those of you who don't know what the O2 Stadium looks like, check it out. It's a big round thing, very stadium-y. And it unfortunately, well, there's been some loss of lives and it's been very windy, and I didn't actually end up going to work on Friday, but at the same time I was just like, yeah, like I know I didn't stream on Friday, and for that I apologize, because I know I meant to, but I just was not in a place to do that. But I ended up going to work on Saturday instead. So today, in the early afternoon, which was nice, so I got home and by then I could relax and not have to think about it for the entire day. But no, I say the entire day, but I didn't go until like 12:30, and then I went to get some medication that I needed from my pharmacy, and then I went to work, and I was a bit late starting that. I wasn't really expecting what I was expecting to find literally nobody there, but I suppose luckily I went to my job, and one of the receptionists was there with the electrician, who obviously, you know, was there to let him in and everything, which I wasn't expecting. Nobody tells me anything. I'm a cleaner, but it was nice not to have to necessarily worry about walking into a place and being called an intruder by a security alarm. So I just had to lock other people out instead. So that was still nice. That was more or less like my regular routine, except slightly earlier in the day and really wet and miserable. So I got home and, you know, had a nice relaxing shower, sat down. I've been playing a lot of Going Medieval. I don't know if any of you have I've played it at least once on this channel already, but I know that a lot of you guys who follow me already aren't that interested in like RTS games, but Going Medieval is like this nice mix between, oh, I get to personally know the settlers who make up my village, and also I get super control on what the buildings look like and everything, and, you know, supplies and stuff. It's a nice mix of resource management and also the personal. These are the characters, and these are who are capable of whatever. So always a nice change. My gosh, I've been playing a lot of that recently in my own time. Love me some RTS. RTS is I find it satisfying, but also like super stressful. I can only play it in like in short bursts. Things like Castle and Kingdoms, which I've also played on the channel, is that I could get away with that for hours and hours and hours and get nowhere, and I can play Banished for hours and hours and hours and get nowhere and also be super happy about it. But with Banishment, it's really easy for things to go south super quickly. So you gotta be super careful with Banishment. But I'm quite good at it, if I do say so myself. Um, but like, Going Medieval is a really, really great game if you're more into getting to know the people that you're controlling in your games, which I like. It's one of the few resource management games that I feel like has that bit of, you know, like a sort of personal touch. Because most of them, there's like a distance, and it's mostly the buildings and all sorts of stuff. But there's a little bit more personalization, I suppose, with the settlers and things. Because they've all got their likes and dislikes and stuff like that. Oh, pardon me. I still need to get RimWorld, but you know what I got the other day? The other day. I actually got the Phoenix Wright trilogy, the first 3 games, super cheap, if I do say so myself. So I found them, and I'd love to play them on the channel at some point. So that's something I'm looking forward to in the future. I do have Monkey Island. I haven't forgotten. I got gifted Monkey Island, so we'll be doing that next. Whatever game we finish next, we're gonna play Monkey Island. To be fair, when I play Timberborn, I feel personally attacked when my beavers are unhappy. I know, right? You're trying your hardest to make them happy, and they just refuse. They just refuse to be happy. And you're trying your hardest, and you're like, how do you make people happy? It's like, I could build another church, but that's going to take like a year in game time, and it's just so... But I too understand feeling personally offended when things go south. There's never enough grilled potatoes. Is that a thing in Timberborn? Because one of the things that I really enjoy is Frostpunk, and maybe I'll play it on the channel at some point, but the thing is, it's really grim, and I don't know, I think you guys would enjoy it. I like it a lot, but it's also one of the more difficult RTS games. You've had Frostpunk for years and never touched it. It's really good. Play it. Oh my god, it's so stressful. It's so good. I know, oh my god, it's so stressful isn't exactly a glowing review, but it is if you like a bit of a challenge in your RTS games, because as I say, Kingdoms and Castles is great, but it's one of the most low stress RTS games you could possibly have, I believe, which makes it great. Also, it's really cubey and cute and everything. Like, Kingdoms and Castles is such a cute RTS. I'm 100% about it. I've got my giant cup of tea. Mimi up north. You thought it was grim up north. Well, I don't know. If you've played Frostpunk, it's probably way more grim there. But yeah, no, it's been pretty grim down south too, weather-wise recently. I mean, I'm talking about Eunice, of course. I was saying to Abnock the other day, my shed is a pretty good. We've got a more or less empty shed, but it's essentially just a metal box with a roof on it. When it falls over, because it's empty and there's nothing in it, which it does, if there's high winds of any kind, it will fall over. And it did so. And apparently, I don't know how this happened, but we had one thing in that shed, and it was a bike. We had a bike in that shed, and this bike lost its wheel. One of its wheels during the storm. It just came off. And, the trains are barely running, that is fair. It got proper windy again today. Oh, okay. Well, I've been safe down where I am in the south. More or less. I actually got to go to work this weekend. I didn't go on Friday because that was proper death winds. As I say, a bike lost an entire wheel, and I'm not exactly sure how. Nothing but hills and wind. Well, see, this is one of my main things. I would quite like to live near the coast, but I'm fully aware of how windy the bloody coast is at the best of times, and I've got long hair, and I feel like to make the best of my coastal life, I'd need to cut it really short all the time. But I do love coastal towns because I like it. I like a good beach. I'd love to go on holiday to a nice white beach, not gonna lie. Does anybody know anything about geography? What are the types of rock and where can they be found? Because all I know is sedimentary, and that's like your rocky rocks. And your volcanic rocks are like igneous rocks or something like that. If you know any, you got Ignatius, that's the right. Ignatius. Okay, cool. But like the other types of rock, because I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and igneous. Okay, I understand. Igneous. You're just annoyed that I keep saying Ignatius, aren't you? No, but yes, if you know any other types of rocks, I would, because I know some of them, but then like I constantly forget. It's one of those pieces of information that flits in and out of my head when it is relevant, but like on an average day, I cannot for the life of me remember what types of rocks are what. There's boulders and gravels and sand. See, somebody told me that, like, sand was, silicon, and I said, no, silicon is plastic, and they went, no, it's rock. And, if anybody knows better than either one of us, please do tell me. Sand is silicate. Silicon, silicone. Are they two different things? Okay. Sand is silicate. Okay, cool. Okay, so what type of rock is granite? Is granite just its own thing? Or is it like, because there's sedimentary rock, there's igneous rock, and then there's another one which begins with S that I can't remember, but there's like the three main types of rock, if I recall. Granite is igneous. Okay. It's the one you just don't notice is there. Okay, cool. You take it for granted. Okay. I love a good pun. Excellent work. Alright, so, shall I get on with story time? But seriously, please continue educating me about rocks if you know literally anything about it, because, or just, just give me random facts. I love random facts. I would love to know what random fact comes off the top of your head right now, if you have one. Okay, so you think about that, I'll think about this. Let's go. Chapter 14. It was a grand morning. As he headed back towards the sea, the sun shone in his eyes, and he felt zooms of excitement running through him, zooms he couldn't explain at all. Except the grass was so green and twinkling with last night's rain that there were flowers everywhere in the grass, tiny spots of yellow and blue, and all the birds were singing. All the birds were singing their heads off, and he seemed to have it all to himself. The whole show was for his benefit, and the sandwiches put him 1 meal away from worry. Today he would not have to think about food. With that huge breakfast inside him, that made even burping a pleasure, for it brought back the taste of porridge and bacon and eggs and marmalade. I don't like marmalade, it's gross. He reached the coast in a rush, for the land sloped down. For the land sloped down towards the sea, and there, spread before him, lay the island of Lindisfarne. I always forget how to say that. When I was a kid, my mom took us to the library every fortnight. Show made me take fiction as half the books, otherwise I'd just take books of random facts. Okay, nice. At least she forced you to read pretend books. Books of pretend. I'll tell you what, I wish I could read more space books. I don't know, do you need to renew library cards? Because, like, I've got some. I've got at least 2, I think. But I haven't been to a proper library for, like, since uni. Man, I miss my uni library. Ooh, that brings emotional pain. And there spread before him lay the island of Lindisfarne, with the road to it clear, a dark bar of sand leading across the shining water. Everything was on his side, and he made up his mind. To Lindisfarne he would go. He was a pilgrim, and he would finish his pilgrimage. He was ignorant of Lindisfarne as any Geordie boy of his age. He knew it was called Holy Island because hundreds of years ago monks had lived on it. One of them had been a saint, Saint Cuthbert. And the tide went in and out, making it part of the land twice a day, and an island twice a day. And that was all he knew. By the very look of the island, with the shadows of clouds drifting across the green hide, spotted like the hide of a cow with brown patches and sand dunes, it did not look like part of the world of bombs and vicious farmers and the terrible battle to get enough to eat, and even a newspaper to wipe your backside with. He just knew it was an enchanted place, a further shore. He knew it was crossing, not the North Sea, but the River Jordan, that the vicar talked about in church, like Christian in the Pilgrim's Progress. The trumpets would sound for him when he reached the other side. There was a cottage. As he left the island, a man leaning on his gate, smoking a pipe, called out, 2 hours! You've got a grand day for it. I only get halfway up the stairs before we sat down and read most of them. I can tell you most carpets are made from plastic. Not a great fact, but well, I mean, that is a random fact. I did ask for one. I didn't ask for necessarily any good ones. But I did not know that most rugs were made from plastic. But I suppose it does make sense. Do I play SCGO? I do not. I don't know what that is. What is SCGO? Didn't ask for a good friend. No, but seriously, I asked for a random. Hi CLTL, by the way. No, I don't know what SCGO is. Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Oh, I see. No, I actually haven't played Counter-Strike since before I hit 12. Oh, I know what Counter-Strike is. I haven't played any since the really early days. And it's I gotta say, FPSs are not my thing. But at least not generally speaking. I do like co-op games and things like that, but generally speaking, I have not played an FPS for a very, very long time, and I apologize for that. For you specifically, of course. Although I did like Counter-Strike. I used to panic and shoot people in the head. Um, like, I was surprisingly good at it for the amount of panic that I had when I was playing the game as a kid. All like because we used to play it in like internet cafes when I was living in Asia, and I used to sit there and like scream, and I'd make the employees there laugh at least a little bit. So there was always that, you know, and it's one of those things. I panic a lot. I cannot be put in those situations. Whew. Okay, so he didn't know what the man meant, but he waved back cheerfully. The wet sand was firm beneath the army boots that Artie had given him. Even the joggling pans on his back were merry companions. Don loved the hugeness of it, ran ahead, barking for joy, ran in huge circles, pouncing on bits of seaweed, charging the flocks of feeding gulls, sending them exploding into the air like white fireworks. I'm coming, thought Harry. I'm coming, he said to the island, all the way across. The only thing that worried him were the 2 watchtowers. The first he came up to when he was on a third of the way across, a gaunt erection of tarred wood piles and rusting iron girders that thrust itself leaning from the sand. There was a little tarred cabin on top, with a pointed roof, and the legs were thick with barnacles and seaweed. It looked like it had been there for a very long time, fighting the waves. There was a thin runged ladder leading up into it. He took off his gear and climbed the ladder. But the little cabin was completely empty, except people had carved and penciled names and dates all over the planks inside, and phrases like, "Oh dear, caught again," and "a bit of cold night." It felt unpleasantly like a prison somehow. It did not feel a happy place. Of course, it could not be a prison, really. It was obviously to do with the war, and it reminded him of the watchtowers the Nazis had round their prison camps. He left it quickly and did not check on the other one half a mile further on. I'll have you know I'd be on high alert all the time. I just would not be a competent shooter. So no, honestly, seriously, I say this all the time, but like, I have an irrational fear of zombies, right? But I would definitely be in the person in the party that would be like, yes, I am completely competent. But the thing is, I would surround myself with really competent people, and they would think I was the waste of space. Because I would be completely worthless at defending myself. I would need all sorts of people to do the defending for me. Because it's like, I'm good at some things, but I don't know how well I do in life or death situations, let's be honest. I don't think that's something that most people do know. Then he was on the beach in Lindisfarne itself, with an endless row of sand dunes on his left. He climbed up one that was higher than the others, and looked ahead. The sand dunes seemed to go on forever, but there were grey buildings at the end of them, and what looked like ruins. He went on. He was plodding now. The weight of pack started to cut into his shoulders. Some of the brightness seemed to go out of the morning. Then the sun went behind the clouds. He sat down to rest and thought of the pack of sandwiches, and the thought of this pack of sandwiches tempted him. He tried to resist. He'd had a good breakfast. It was just gustiness. Sorry, it was just gustiness? Yes, that's the one. That's the word. But the thought of the sandwiches, he'd allow himself just one. The trouble was, they were lady sandwiches, not soldier sandwiches, small and dainty and tasty. He had a second and a third. Don came up and begged for one trustingly. He knew the rules. What they had, they shared. Before Don knew it, nearly all the sandwiches were gone. He closed the pack, and there were 3 left. He shoved them violently into the pack with a fury that broke them. He suddenly felt very depressed and got up and started walking quickly before he felt any worse. Oh my God. He knew these sudden depressions. They always came when the sun went in. As he reached the houses, the treacherous sun came out again, and he felt better. But the houses were just a village, like any other village, and the people standing in the cottage doors looked at him in a close, nosy, silent way that he hadn't ever noticed on the mainland. He felt at any moment they were going to ask him what he wanted. He felt if he stopped walking on, looked at all lost, they would ask him what he wanted. So he headed towards the ruins, which at least looked interesting. Which at least looked interesting. A random fact and a good survival tip. Did you know that human urine contains 2% salt, which is almost as salty as seawater, which is 3.5? So you should never drink your urine in a survival situation. Yes, I've heard that. And I also heard that, because back in the day it was good survival advice, and then, it suddenly became not that. Other people's is fine. No, I don't think that's what he's saying. Other species might be. I don't know. I disagree. I feel like you should probably stay away from any creature's urine. Let's just, do that. I did read a story, though, about a couple that, like a human couple that drank each other's urine for some reason. They thought it was romantic or something. It's just gross, really. It's just gross. We just don't do that. Just don't do that. Like, ever. I don't even think peeing on jellyfish is a thing anymore. I think that stopped being a thing some time ago. Reindeer that have eaten fly agarics? I don't know what that is, but probably not. He met a man at the gate of the ruins. He would have liked to ask him about St. Cuthbert, but the man said sharply, "If you're going there, keep hold of that dog." He wandered around the ruins with Don on a leash. Don didn't like that much. He kept on tugging furiously at the leash, wanting to sniff, wanting to be free, wanting to pee on the old stones as well. He lifted his hind leg twice, and Harry had to drag him away. Because out of the corner of his eyes, he could see the old man was still lingering by the gate, watching. The ruins were quite interesting, especially the single arch of stones that was still in place, that had once helped hold up the long-departed roof. It was so high and pointed and slender, you wondered if it could even hold itself up, how it could even hold itself up. Fly agaric mushrooms are stereotypical red mushrooms with the white dots. They make you massively trip balls but can be dangerous to eat. Indeed. Apparently reindeer eat them, but the trippy substance stays undigested and gets peed out. Huh. See, I didn't know that, but you know, it's very interesting to know that I guess reindeers can't get high off red mushrooms. Red polka dotty mushrooms. Or white polka dotty mushrooms. It really depends. But hey, there you go. How it could even hold itself up now. And the stones of the walls, oh, for me, were worn by the wind and the rain into such strange shapes, like goblins' grinning faces, or squatting fat birds. But you could only stare at the stones for so long, especially when the sun went in again. In the end, they were only stones. When it began to rain, next to the ruins was a church that still had the roof on. They ran for it, made it into the pouch together. Timidly, Harry tried the great iron ring on the church door. The door swung open silently, on greased hinges. Inside was nice, full of bright things, and with a strange, sweet smell. And there was a light green baize card table by the door, with little books stacked on it, called A Life of Saint Cuthbert. Eagerly he reached for one, opened it, and he had always been a keen reader. He missed his books. "Have you paid for that?" The voice made Harry jump guiltily, and it was the man from the ruins who must have followed him. "Not yet," said Harry. "I was just looking." "Then pay for it or put it down. We can do without dirty fingerprints all over them." Harry reached in his pocket, found a 3-penny bit. "Don't give it to me," said the man. "Can't you read what it says? Put it in the box with the slit in it." Blushing, Harry looked around for the box. He seemed to have a lot of trouble getting the coin through the slit. We used to sit around talking about them while camping. Ooh. A small window into your musty past. I mean, fair enough. That's one way to learn about reindeer. Does anybody have any more random facts? It would be super interesting. But I honestly didn't know that reindeer couldn't get high off mushrooms, or at least those particular mushrooms. I don't know if they'd be particularly averse to other sorts of mushrooms. Not necessarily healthy. I apologize for all the yawning. With the man glaring at him. Then the man said, "What's the idea, bringing that great dog into a church? Haven't you got any manners? Haven't you been taught the difference between right and wrong? I'll tie him up outside." "You'll not. I don't want him peeing all over the churchyard. And look at all the sand Look at all the sand on your boots. It's going all over the floor." Harry glared at the man, and the man glared back. "You're nothing but a little heathen," said the man. "God knows where you were dragged up. You're a gypsy. You a gypsy or something?" He glanced at the pans dangling from the pack on Harry's back. "Just looking for a chance to steal from the church, were you?" Harry felt treacherous hot tears starting to gather in the corners of his eyes and yelled, "Back home, I go to church with my man twice every Sunday." "Where's that then?" "St. Peter's, Blackwell." "Well, get back there, and the trail of sand all over the floor. See how they like it. Suffer the little children to come unto me, and Forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of heaven, roared Harry, and he had gone to church twice every Sunday, and a lot of what he had heard had stuck in his mind. "You what?" shouted the man. "You little toy, how dare you quote scripture at me? I'll belt you on the lug." "If anyone should offend these little ones," roared Harry, "it were better a millstone was hanged around his neck and he was flung into the sea." Once started, he found it very hard to stop, especially when he quarreled with strange adults. The man's jaw dropped open. He was speechless. Then he raised his hand for a blow. Don growled warningly. "Get out," said the man. "Get out of our church." Harry got. At the churchyard gate, he turned back and shouted, "Call yourself a Christian?" But it didn't make him feel any better. And what was worse, when he looked across the back of the mainland, the tide had come in. The sand bridge was gone. Wherever he looked, there were the waves of the shining ocean. He was cut off. Suddenly, the whole island felt like a terrible trap. He wanted to sit down and howl, but he knew he had to keep moving. People were still watching him. Some were kids his own age. The school holidays must have started. That's what Ada's mom must have meant last night when she said, "A wet week for the start of your holiday." Kids were bad. Home on somebody else. And there was a proper yelp. Then he was knocked flat, and the wood was held so he couldn't move it. And what felt like a boot hit him agonizingly on the ribs. And then there was a barking, slathering hurricane above him, and a sharp snap of teeth, and another yelp of pain. And then they were gone. He leapt to his feet, his legs shaking. He saw 3 of them standing 10 yards off, one clutching his shoulder like it hurt. Another held a wrist from which blood trickled, and the leader was still trying to crawl in agony, but to his henchmen, doubled up with pain. They shouted at each other, "Go and get Sticks! Go and get Billy Prudhoe! And his brother! And Alf Green! This bugger's mad. He needs settling for good. Tell the police, the dog's dangerous. He needs putting down." They picked up their leader, but he kept on doubling up with pain. When he could finally stand unaided, he said, "I'll stay here and watch him. You fetch the rest of the lads." Eager to do his bidding, they fled and soon vanished over the sand hills. Harry knew he was in a jam. The leader was still there. If Harry made off and tried to hide, the leader would follow. The leader would follow him and summon up his returning gang from the top of the nearest sand dune. The leader had to be fixed. He walked towards him. The leader tried to back off, but he was still in pain. Harry caught up with him easily as he tried to scrabble to safety, but up the side of a sand dune. Harry took careful aim and hit the leader on the ankle with the curvy length of wood. With all his force, it was the only way. There was a nasty crack. The leader yelped, fell down, and held his ankle. "Bastard, you've broke it! I'll kill you for that!" Harry didn't say a thing. He went back to his gear and picked it up. He called to the dog and made off up the next slope. The leader made no attempt to follow. He was still nursing his ankle. He soon dropped from sight. Harry tried every trick he knew to dodge them. The double was they could follow his footprints in the sand of the sandhills, and especially the dogs. They would be a dead giveaway. So at first he just plunged ahead regardless, till he came to a little pebbly stream running out of the sandhills to the sea. It gave him an idea. First he milled around, all over the place, but especially where the tall grass grew in clumps, and his footsteps didn't show. When he had made an utter confusion of the whole area and laid a dozen false trails, he got the dog by the collar and walked him to the sea down the little pebbly stream where no footprints showed. After that they walked up to their ankles in the waves, heading north. The gentle breaking of waves hid everything, but it was dicey walking on the open beach. So when another stream came down the sand, he walked the dog up to it and back into the sandhills. After that, all he could do was stick to the bottom of the sand dunes, the little valleys that ran between them, and hope for the best. He found other liners of footsteps. Ooh, pardon me. Hi, Starbreeze, how are you? He found other lines of footprints, even the prints of another large dog, and that cheered him. There were other people on the dunes, solitary men with binoculars, family groups on holiday with dogs. He kept well clear of them, out of sight. He didn't want them reporting his presence to the gang. He never saw the gang again. By dusk, with much weary walking up and down through the sliding sand, he was back on the beach that led to the sand bridge. The sand bridge wasn't far away. It seemed a little narrower than it had been that morning, with little wavelets eating at its edges. But it was still more than 200 yards across, and he couldn't wait to get off this horrible island. Ugh, pardon me. He and the dog slid like shadows on the end of the bridge and vanished into the gathering dark. Back nearer the village, the wooden warning sign told the time for safe crossing was half an hour past, and he had been careful to go nowhere near the village. Oh no! I'm wonderful, thank you, Starbreeze, and I'm glad you're here. Welcome to the channel. The trouble was, he was a town child. This was chapter 15, by the way. He believed in roads and he believed in roads that stayed as roads, bridges that stayed as bridges. He believed he had a God-given right of way. He didn't know the sea. It was not that he was a fool. He kept a sharp eye on the lines of tiny distant breakers on each side of him that glowed with the white of breaking surface in the dark. In a way, they were a guide, like the white lines they had painted on the edge of pavements back home, to guide people when the blackout started. He began to get the worrying idea that the white lines were getting nearer, but it was hard to judge in the dark. He hurried as fast as he could, but he was utterly weary. His luggage weighed a ton. The pans banging against his bottom were nagging enemies now. He stopped and looked behind. The cursed island was fading to a low, dim, mottled hump. But in front, the North Umbrian coast seemed no nearer now, flat, boring. No nearer, low, flat, boring. Get on, get on. Yes, the lines of surf were moving together. The bridge ahead was narrower now, seeming a little wider than the big wide coast road at home. He swung round. Should he make Should he make back to the island? He didn't want to. He hated the place. And he's a good way from it now. And then, as he watched in horror, a wave more determined than the rest kept on and on until it had rolled right across the sand bridge between him and the island. For an awful moment there was no bridge, just sea. Then the bridge heaved into sight again, like a long whale breaking the surface of a narrower still. He looked towards the mainland. The bridge was still quite wide, unbroken. The way ahead was safer. He must have run another 100 yards. The quality of the sand under his feet seemed to be changing. Ooh, pardon me. Growing wetter, soggier, softer. He was slithering rather than running. His feet couldn't get a grip anymore. And then he saw it, the wave in front that swept right across the sand bridge. Frantic, he looked behind again. There was no sign of the sand bridge at all. Just the waves rolling across, one after the other. Run, run, run! The dog ran with him, barking urgently, but he knew he wasn't going to make it. The world was changing its rules. He ran into the next wave as it crossed in front. His feet were soaking, icy, in an instant. The sand under them was freezing. Was like freezing porridge. He was wading slowly like a duck, and the mainland looked far away as ever. It came to him that he was going to drown. There was no way he couldn't drown. He couldn't run a mile. He couldn't run 50 yards. And the next crossing was halfway to his knees and strong. He felt the tug of it. And now the whole sand bridge was gone for good. Even between waves it wasn't showing. Where had all the water come from so quickly? He couldn't even work out which way to go anymore. He was standing up to his ankles in the whole wide, trackless sea. He felt dizzy as the endless waves moved past him with their burdens of sand. The ground seemed to be moving under him, sucking his feet away. He nearly fell, and there was nothing to hang on in the whole moving world. He gave one last despairing gaze around. And then he saw it, leaning crookedly out of the sea, dimly dark against the moving waves. The watchtower. The second watchtower. He remembered, oddly, the writing scratched inside the walls of the first watchtower. Put again. A bitter, cold night. The tower was a refuge for people trapped by the tide. Before it became really clear in his mind, he was floundering towards it. The waves were up to his knees now, nearly pushing him away towards the left. There were deeper bits, where the water sloshed up, freezing him between the legs, freezing him so he had no feeling. He had to keep looking for the watchtower because the waves were pushing him off course. And all the time the dog was alongside, barking joyously, thinking it was another game. He fell full length, hauled himself back upright, and with a choking scream, fell again, and the waves rolled over him, scrambling, crawling, underwater, then a lungful of air that ended in water again. But the tower was looming up, a huge wave that drove the dog sideways into him, so they went down in a flailing tangle, up, breathing, screaming, gargling, drowning. And then something hard and solid banged against his head. He grabbed, and he had it. Worked sideways towards the bottom of the ladder, hanging on like a limpet as the waves hit him. Foot off the ladder, climb, climb, climb. His soaked clothes dragged him back. His gear was like a heavy hand on his shoulders. He pushed open the door, collapsed inside. He waited for the dog to arrive and land on top of him. No dog. Still no dog. He swung round and looked down in the darkness. He could see the dog's head, and only the dog's head. It was the bottom of the ladder. It wasn't standing anymore. It was swimming now. As he looked, a wave swept the head away on one side. He screamed, "Don!" Then he saw the dog in between the waves, trying to swim back. Why hadn't it climbed the ladder after him? And then he realized the ladder was too steep. The rungs were rusted way too thin. And now, no way a big dog like Don could climb it, especially from swimming in the sea. Don was going to drown. He was a good swimmer, but he was too far from the land. And the waves were big, and the dog wouldn't leave him to save itself. It was being killed by its own faithfulness. Something inside him snapped. The dog was the other half of him. The dog was the last person he had left. Without the dog, the world would be empty. You shan't leave him. You shan't have him as well. Or you might as well have me too. Screaming swear words, and he knew not what. He threw half the burden on his back and went pell-mell down the ladder into the sea. It was deep now. It came up to his shoulders. Its cold, entering the coldness of his own body, flooding him, took all his breath away. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the head of the dog swimming up to him again, just a dark blob with two depressed ears against the low glow of the breaking surf. He grabbed the collar and the ladder doubly hard as he felt the muscular swell of the next wave coming in to hit them. He thought his arms had been pulled off his body, but then the wave passed and the dog was still close to him, its hair floating queerly in the water, tickling his hand. "Up, boy!" He heaved the dog at the ladder and scrambled at the thin iron rung with its front feet, not able to get a grip. He knew there was only one thing to do, and he did it without thinking. He took a breath, ducked underwater, and got his shoulder under the dog's broad hunch and heaved. By the time the next wave hit him, he was standing upright on the sand with both hands on the ladder, and the dog, an incredible weight, was standing on his shoulders, clear out of the water. It scrambled above him, but it couldn't get any higher. As the next wave came, he put one foot on the ladder and tried to step up. The lifting power of the wave did it. His leg muscles screamed in pain, but he made the step up. Waiting for the next big wave, timing it just right, he made another step up, and a third. But with every step, the lifting power of the waves decreased. He stuck on the third step. He couldn't make the fourth. His hands were going numb with cold. He couldn't feel his legs. He felt the huge wave coming. It must be 2 steps this time or nothing. It was all he was ever going to be able to manage. It was a very huge wave. Spluttering like a maniac, he managed 1, 2, then, incredibly, 3. It was impossible, but he did it. The next second, he felt a tremendous convulsive kick from the dog's hind legs. Then no weight at all. And he knew he'd failed. He could never do it again. Don! Don! He hung on, blinded by the seawater, not wanting to do anything ever again. Let go. Let the sea take you. No more trying. No more pain. Then a burst of barking hit his ears as the seawater drained from them. He looked up and the dog's head was sticking out of the open door. It was quite easy after that. He only had to rest between every step he took. Is my background soundproof? It is not. It is not, Starbreeze, unfortunately. I bet some people wish it was, but it isn't. It was not so bad. The 2 blankets in the middle of the bedroll were only damp. He stripped and rubbed himself down with them, then wrapped them around himself. He would have liked to rub the dog down too, but there was nothing else left dry to do it with. There were nails knocked on the walls of the hut. He had wrung out his clothes and hung them to dry. Some hope. For the sea was still rising, climbing the rungs of the ladder, one by one, inexorably. He wondered, quite calmly, if the tide ever rose so high. The waves ever grew so wild. But the refuge on top was entirely submerged. If the tide ever rose so high, the waves ever grew so wild that the refuge on top was entirely submerged. If so, there was nothing he could do about it. And the sea sent its messengers before it. The very air he breathed was full of salty spray, so that he breathed a mixture of air and water, half boy, half fish. And the bigness of the sea overwhelmed him, the bigness of the sound of it. The land seemed so far away and nowhere. Nothing but sea. The sound of the waves did not soothe him. The sea had tried to kill him. Might still kill him. Meanwhile, he watched it. In the end, with bitter satisfaction, he watched it lose its force, like a beaten army, and start its retreat, rung by rung. Only then did he curl up in the 2 blankets and fall asleep. You love the patterns. Oh, good. Oh, that's good. I'm glad. I bought it. I say cheaply. I bought it fairly cheaply on Amazon. It's literally just a partition. I think I bought it for like £70 ish. 70, 80-ish, if not slightly cheaper than that, but I don't want to like undervalue it just in case I'm completely wrong. I was fascinated by it and it took ages to work out it's a screen. It is. It's literally just a partition. It's this is a wall right here. It's literally just a silly partition. But I mostly just have this for privacy because I do live in one place and I do live in the living room and I don't really want to subject people walking past here to being on a webcam when they don't need to be. So I got this relatively cheaply, I suppose, considering. Where was I? Only then did he curl up and fall asleep. Sunlight wakened him, falling in through the half-open door onto his face. He tried getting up and could hardly move. He was so cut and bruised and stiff. He peered out at his enemy. The enemy was nowhere to be seen. Nothing but flat sand, streaming gently in the sun, seaweed, feeding gulls, a mottled duck leading her mottled chicks to drink at a stream of fresh water that flowed across the sands. He realized how thirsty he was, but he'd have to get dressed first. Those thin, rusty ladder rungs would cut his bare feet to ribbons. As he must have cut Don's paw last night, the dog was lying, looking at him, still half soaked, its fur in great wet lumps. It was licking its paw, and red blood showed. Jesus, he'd got Don up last night. How on earth was he going to get him down? The sand looked dizzying miles away. Shivering, he dragged on his damp clothes. It was only then he realized the precious attaché case had gone. Oh no! He didn't even remember dropping it. In the fight against the drowning, all the insurance policies, all the ration books, and the little bottle of brandy. The last of Mum and Dad, and Dulcie, and Dad's watch, that he only wore for the best. Still, he was thirsty, so he climbed down and had a drink. It was such a calm, warm, lovely morning. But for once, the lovely morning didn't work. He just kept thinking about the attaché case and feeling totally guilty and miserable. Don barked at him hopelessly, absurdly, from the door of the watchtower. How was he going to get him down? And yet that solved itself so easily. A man with a horse and cart came across the sands. "Hey, kid, what's that dog doing up there?" "He's my dog. We got caught by the tide last night." "You want me to fetch him down for you?" "Please." He was a huge man. The biggest man Harry had ever seen. He just climbed up the ladder, spoke to the dog, heaved him over his shoulder, and climbed down with him. On his shoulder. Don didn't look much bigger than a fox terrier. No, on his shoulder, Don didn't look much bigger than a fox terrier. You want to get that dog's paw seen to. It's a bad cut. Then he was off across the sands again. A miracle. It didn't make Harry feel any better. He began to worry about getting Don to a vet. Felt for the banknotes he always carried on the right-hand pocket of his raincoat. A shapeless, sodden wad of green paper that he had to squeeze the water out of. He tried to peel off a note, and it began to tear. He didn't even feel like crying. He was beyond crying. He didn't feel like he had any tears left in him. He didn't feel he had any blood left in him. But they had to get ashore. The man had told him he only had half an hour. Halfway to shore, he saw something brown. Brown and square in the middle of the rock pool. It couldn't possibly be, but it was. The attaché case. It was a morning for miracles, but strangely, that didn't make him feel any better either. The miracles were coming too late, especially as, when he picked up the attaché case, it was far too heavy and deluged water out of the corners. Inside, everything was sodden, ruined. But he wearily packed it up and plodded on. They reached the land. They went as far as the main road, but Don was limping worse and worse, so they went and sat down on the grass by the roadside. He got Don to show him his paw. The dog was very reluctant. The gash was still bleeding and full of sand, muck, and little stones. Don wouldn't let him take the stones out. It must hurt too much. So they just went on sitting and sitting, while the tide came in and began to go out again. Harry just felt that his own personal tide had gone out forever. It was never coming back. It was all no good. He had fought and schemed and walked and gathered sea coal for all these weeks, and now they were worse off than ever. It was no good trying anymore. No matter how hard you fought, everything just went wrong in the end. The chip shot in Timoth, the stay with Joseph, Artie, his own little pillbox, Landisfern, the further shore, all useless. Look at Ada's mother. All that adventure and cheerfulness and flying and climbing mountains, and now she was just a fat old lady falling downstairs and waiting to die. Everybody died in the end. He wished they'd drowned last night. By now, all his troubles would be over. Even the airman's marvelous watch had stopped, the water glass dewed with droplets. With that thought in mind, he fell asleep. He never noticed the man. The man had been noticing him for some time. He was in a tiny Austin 7. He had passed once and seen Harry sitting there. Then he passed again an hour later. Harry was still sitting in the same place. The man took much more interest this time. The third time the man drove past, Harry was laying on the grass on the verge of sleep, and Don was sitting holding up his bloody paw helplessly and watching the passing traffic. Oh, poor Don. You're doing all the hitchhiking for him. The man drove past Harry. The man stopped his car with a tiny squeal of brakes. He seemed to sit for a long time, hands on the wheel, as if he was having an inner argument with himself. Then he banged his hands on the steering wheel, as if he'd made up his mind to do something. Then he backed the car slowly to where Harry was lying and got out. Chapter 16. Harry came awake in a blur. At first he thought he was in a bed at home, and it was Mum shaking his shoulder. He opened his eyes, and there was a man's face, a total stranger's face, saying something he couldn't understand, over and over again. He looked around desperately. He was in the open air, in a totally strange place he couldn't even remember coming to. Panic surged inside him. The man said something again, and again. What was he saying? With a last despairing effort, Harry focused his concentration. "Your dog's hurt," said the man. "You must get him to a vet." He looked at the man's face. The man flinched and looked away, at the sky, at the sea, anywhere but at Harry. What a strange man. The man looked at him again, a fleeting, almost guilty glance. "Can I look at the dog's paw?" he said, looking at Don. "Yes," said Harry. He couldn't understand this man at all. Maybe Don would understand him. He trusted Don's judgment. If Don let the man touch him, the man must be all right. Don let the man touch him. Let him stroke his ears. The man talked to Don in a gentle voice and called him boy. Then he raised the hurt paw gently. Again, Don let him. The man looked at the paw, then let go of it. Don licked the man's face with his long, pinky-purple tongue. The man came back, his face serious. "We must get him to a vet. That gash won't heal itself. He could lose his foot. He could die." "Okay," said Harry. He didn't understand anything except about Don's paw. The man helped Harry to his feet. His touch was soft, like a woman's. His hands were strong enough, but they trembled. Harry knew the man was terribly excited about something. The man put Harry into the seat next to the driver's seat, then pulled forward the driver's seat and piled all Harry's gear onto the back seat. The stuff dripped all over the cracked leather of the back seat, but Harry was beyond caring. Then the man coaxed Don into the back seat next to Harry's stuff and got him himself. And they were off. Not very fast. The car was little and old, and the engine sounded weak, as if it might give out at any moment. The windscreen was all yellowed and round the edges. Was all yellowed round the edges, and there was some kind of silver dial on the front of the bonnet. Oh, excuse me. Hiccups now. Front of the bonnet. The man drove silently, keeping his eyes on the road. His hands were very white and tight on the wheel. All he said was, "That cut paws bad, very bad. We must get it seen to, straight away." He said it 4 times without looking at Harry at all, as if to himself. The vet's was more reassuring. A big house with a big brass plate saying John Harper, MRCBS. Very highly polished, but with dried brasso in the lettering. Inside there was a highly polished brown lino, and it smelt like a hospital. The vet came bustling in his white coat, which had pale pink washed-out stains down the front. Now, what have we here?" He lifted Don onto the table, played with his ears a bit, and then lifted the foot and said, "That's a nasty one. How did he get it?" "On an iron ladder," said Harry in a very small voice. Then added, "Is he going to be all right?" "Be a big job," said the vet. "I'll have to chloroform him before I see to it, and I'll have to keep him in for a few days. He'll have to be kept still." Harry despaired. "How much will that cost?" "You can leave that to me," said the man with the car. Sorry, I've got a cat in my lap, oof, calm down, kiddo. You do a sleep, or you do a cuddle. You do a cuddle good. He grabbed it like he was saying something shameful. He gabbled it like he was saying something shameful. "Right, Mr. Murgatroyd," said the vet. There was something odd in his voice as he said it. It wasn't dislike. It was more pity, as if Mr. Murgatroyd had a wooden leg or was deformed or something. "Right then, we'd better get on with it straight away. Sooner it's done, the better." And he picked up Don and carried him away through the open door without even giving Harry a chance to say goodbye. "Give me a call this evening, Mr. Murgatroyd. I'll let you know how he's got on." And suddenly Harry and Mr. Murgatroyd were outside and back at the car. Without Don, Harry was suddenly terribly embarrassed. He could think of nothing to say, but went on staring at the little silver dial on the bonnet of the car. Mr. Murgatroyd didn't seem to know what to say either. Then Harry reached in his raincoat pocket and felt the wet wad of notes. "I've got money," he said, "only it's all stuck together." "How d'you mean?" said Mr. Murgatroyd with a sudden burst of enthusiasm, as if he was glad he'd found something to say. Harry showed him. "If I wait till they're dry, I might be able to—" No, said Mr. Murgatroyd. The way to separate them is to make them wetter. Come on, I'll show you." And he bundled Harry into the car, and there was nothing in his life at all half so important as separating some banknotes. It was quite a long drive, full of twists and turns, long enough to convince Harry that he could never find his way back to Don on his own. Then they were arriving at a big grey stone farmhouse, with windows each side of a blue door. The man drove up cobbles up the side to the back door. There was a large black and white cat sitting on the back doorstep. She came forward to greet Mr. Murgatroyd with a loud meow, her bushy black tail vertical. Mr. Murgatroyd bent to stroke her and started a long conversation. "Dinner time, is it, Mrs. Murgatroyd?" "Not really, you know. You're half an hour early, you scheming puss." I know that feeling. I have 4 cats. They're always scheming. Why don't you go and catch your own dinner for once? Plenty of fat mice round the barns. Only you'd rather sit in the sun and be a kept woman. And so on and so forth, as if he was never going to stop. And the cat talked back to him non-stop too, in a series of pokes and mews, striding backwards and forwards while he gently pulled her tail until Harry could have died with embarrassment. Then Mr. Murgatroyd clapped his hands to his forehead, said, "Banknotes!" and dashed indoors. He filled an enamel basin in the sink from the cold tap and took the solid wodge of notes and dropped them in. Harry watched anxiously while they just floated, waiting for them to dissolve into pure sludge at any moment. £14, 10 shillings, 4 weeks' wages for a grown man. He wondered if Mr. Murgatroyd was some kind of lunatic. The silence between them deepened and deepened. "Fancy a mug of tea?" said Mr. Murgatroyd suddenly. "Yes, please." Well, at least that got rid of him and his terrible silence. It was all right while he was crinkling and bustling around in the kitchen. "Right," said Mr. Murgatroyd. Harry turned and saw a tray set not only with a mug of tea, but a neat embroidered little tray cloth, and a plate with 3 huge slices of fruit cake. "Help yourself to sugar." "Ooh, pardon me." Harry stirred in 3 spoonfuls. The sight of all the cake made his stomach erupt, and it was full of fizzing soda pop. "Eat up all the cake you want. It's Christmas cake, really. It needs finishing up." Mr. Murgatroyd settled into a chair and watched Harry eat. Why was he watching so closely, as if he was counting every crumb? He said it could all be eaten up. He was a jumpy person, sitting on the edge of his chair. Harry suddenly grew ashamed because his hands weren't all that clean. "Sorry, my hands are dirty." "Don't worry about that," said Mr. Murgatroyd. "Don't worry about that at all. Not important, not important." Then he got up and dashed from the room, and as if he'd been shot. Through the window, Harry saw him talking to the cat again. Then, the next time he looked, Mr. Murgatroyd had got hold of the spade and was frantically digging up a patch of garden. Harry finished the cake, even gathered the crumbs together and at his finger end and ate them. Then he drained the tea to the last drop and still felt ravenously hungry. But it was all gone. So he drifted over to the window above the sink. There was the window. He could see Mr. Murgatroyd had finished digging the patch of earth and was now frantically nailing up a bit of fence. Then he looked down. A miracle. £3 notes had floated free. They were nearly transparent with wet, but clear of the wodge. And he had looked. Another one had begun to curl free of the wodge. Mr. Murgatroyd wasn't as mad as he seemed. Oh God! Oh no! No, that's chapter 10. Ow. Sorry, I lost my page. My hand slipped. I was turning the page and everything went south. Here we go. Thumped, footsteps, village, rung by rung, small voice. Sorry, my hands are dirty, not important. Here we go. Then he looked down. A miracle. £3 notes had floated free. They were nearly transparent with the wet, but clear from the wadge. As he looked, another one began to curl free of the wadge. Mr. Murgatroyd wasn't as mad as he seemed. Harry tried to lift one of the notes out of the water. It tore nearly all the way across. "No, no," said Mr. Murgatroyd, appearing suddenly at his elbow. A fish slice. A fish slice and blotting paper. He had come in so silently, Harry jumped a foot in the air. His heart still seemed to be pounding as he watched Mr. M fish out the last notes safely. "Put them by the fire, face upwards. Then even if they stick to the blotting paper, the bank manager can still read the signature. And we'll give you a new one." Harry had an awful vision of himself walking into a bank. "Don't worry, Mr. M," said Mr. M kindly. I'll take them to the bank for you in the morning." "Thanks." He gave Mr. M a smile. "Don't thank me. No need for thanks." Mr. M's eyes were everywhere but Harry's face. "Anything else you want tried out?" The stuff in the car. Get it for you." He fled again and returned, panting with all the stuff. "Get you a clothes horse. Then you can see to things yourself. And make up a fire. Good fire." Then he was off outdoors again. Harry hung what he could over the old wooden clothes horse. He laid the contents of the attaché case itself out onto a clippy rug before the fire, where they steamed gently. Then there was nothing to do. He watched Mr. M out the window, leading a pair of goats past the gate, feeding a small flock of geese, and talking to them. Mr. M seemed to talk to everything that moved. Harry wondered if he was balmy, like old Joseph. He didn't look balmy, tall and thin with a grey nibble moustache and short cut hair. His clothes were worn, but he looked very clean and neat. And he did everything efficiently around the farm. And what he did seemed to make sense. Then there were all the books. Lots of bookshelves, more books piled neatly in the corners of the room. Big serious books, mainly history, but some poetry too, and a pile of war magazines in strict order of date, so that Harry hardly dared touch them. But the last one was badly out of date, 6 months old, and the top of which was thick with dust. He suddenly felt very tired again. He curled up in the big armchair by the fire, and with the last magazine. He remembered it from home. He and Dad had bought the same magazine. But the last copy was a miserable one. January 1942, and the sinking of the Repulse and Prince of Wales. Of the Repulse and Prince of Wales by those Japanese bombers. Had Mr. M stopped buying the magazine then because it was such a miserable number, full of bad news? The news had got better since then. Since the Battle of Midway, the Japs were on the run. He slept. "Wakey, wakey," said Mr. M. "Tea time. It's just bacon and eggs, but there's plenty of it." There was, too. 2 eggs and huge rashers of thick-cut bacon, swimming in their own golden grease. And a pile of thick-cut white bread. And butter with dewdrops coming out of it. "That's a whole week's ration," gasped Harry. 2 weeks' rations. "Not round here." "I know the farmers. Plenty if you know the farmers. I teach their sons. I don't go short. With a nervous flick of the eyes, Mr. M vanished behind a copy of Picture Post. A 6-month-old copy of Picture Post. He seemed to be able to eat and read at the same time, though from the tilt of his grey head, visible above the magazine, he wasn't getting on very well with the article he was reading. Rang the vet, he said, with a mouthful. Your dog's okay, just coming round from the chloroform nicely. Vet says you can go and see him tomorrow. I'll run you down there. Oh, thanks, said Harry. Thanks for being so kind. A fit of coughing broke out behind Picture Post. It went on and on. It appeared a large morsel of food had gone down the wrong way. Mr. M dropped the magazine onto the greasy plate and sat coughing helplessly, tears streaming down his face. Harry, alarmed he was going to choke to death, ran around and banged him firmly on the back. Thanks, said Mr. M, and the coughing had subsided at last. Abruptly, the painful silence fell again. Harry had never known a silence like it. It was scarcely endurable. It hung in the room like a great, dark, threatening shadow, making the tick of the clock far too loud. Every crack of the fire made you jump. Fancy a walk, said Mr. M abruptly. I always have a walk before bed. The clock on the wall said 7 o'clock. Harry thought suddenly that Mr. M was having a fight with time itself, the same as he was having with this terrible fight with silence, a silence that was choking him, only you couldn't fight with time, you couldn't fight with silence. It was as if Harry struggled, as if there was another person in the house, an invisible person who was fighting Mr. M who was frightening Mr. M out of his wits, using the weapons of time and silence. Only that was mad, a mad thought. Was Mr. M mad? Or was he mad himself? Not a nice thought either way. Yeah, we'll come for a walk, said Harry. Mr. M set off at a great pace, so that Harry, still tired, had a great job keeping up. Madness, I say, going for walks late at night. Mr. M had an old battered pair of binoculars hung around his neck. He walked so fast they must have banged against his chest painfully. But it was a glorious evening, and they walked to the sea. Lindisfarne lay low and golden. The sea was in, and the 2 refuge towers stuck out. They stopped to admire the view, and Harry managed to get his breath back. Then he said, "We nearly drowned coming back from there. That's why everything got so wet." "I thought it might be something like that," said Mr. M. He didn't seem interested. He didn't seem all that interested. "Look, there's a Fulmer. He comes every evening about this time and flies round and round this bit of cliff. Exactly the same pattern every time. I think it's just showing off." It was almost a joke, and he did seem a little calmer. And the longer they walked, the calmer he got. He seemed to know a lot about the birds and the plants and explained about them, in a way that was eager and not at all to show off. It was a bit like going for a walk with Artie, only Mr. M knew longer Latin names for things. There were still silences, but they didn't drill into your brain like they did in the house. Only one odd thing happened. As they walked back through the village, having come off the cliffs, there was an old man standing smoking at his cottage door. "Evening, Mr. Murgatroyd." His tone was kind, but there was that same kind of weary pity in it. Again, as if Mr. M had a wooden leg, or if he was deformed or something. "Evening, Sam. How's your lad?" There was a sudden tightness, as if as of pain in Mr. M's voice. "Doing fine," said the old man, "making £14 a week." In that Vickers factory at Newcastle, churning out tanks like cans of beans they are. Every hour God sends. He hardly has time to write. He's still keen to do his bit for his country, but he's in that controlled occupation. For a moment the old man sounded ashamed. Then he said, Nice to see you with a young un, Mr. Murgatroyd. Like old times, eh?" The sudden silent cold was back. Harry, glancing at Mr. M, thought he looked 10 years older all of a sudden. Then Mr. M just said, "Good night, Sam," and walked on. "Everything's dry now," said Harry. Then he screwed up his courage and said, "Can I sleep in your barn tonight?" He didn't know what else to say. It was getting dark outside, and he had to make some arrangements. "You'll do no such thing," said Mr. M. "There's a bed upstairs for you if you want it. First room on your left. And if you want a bath, there's plenty of hot water. Bathroom second on the right. Now I must go and fasten up the geese." And he was gone again before Harry could say thank you. So all Harry could do was go upstairs, take his dried things with him. The bed was neatly turned down, and there were striped pajamas laid out ready for him. Again, they were a bit big for him, but they were certainly far too small for Mr. M. Poor guy. His son probably died in the war. That's what this was about. God damn it. And a towel and a half-used bar of soap and a half-used tube of toothpaste. It was strange having a hot bath again, and even stranger getting into somebody else's worn pajamas twice in 3 nights. But the bed was soft, and he soon fell asleep. And I think for the time being, we're going to call it there for the evening. Oh my god, where's my bookmark? It's not my bookmark. Oh my god, where is it gone? I'll deal with it in a minute. But the point is, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoy Mr. Murgatroyd. I know it's a very strange name. I shall type it out for you, but I don't know if I'm even saying it right. But I feel like it's Megatroid. Mr. Oh my god. Where did you go? Murgatroyd. Mr. Murgatroyd, there you go. One of the Transformers, you see. I could see it. I could. I feel as though Mr. Murgatroyd is how it is pronounced, but I'm gonna go with that because I don't know any better. So, Tis correct. Excellent. I'm not wrong. I love not being wrong. It's about as victorious as I get. Anyway, I'm gonna leave you here for the evening. Thank you so much for popping by and listening to me doing my story time. I can't remember what it was, but there's not actually that long to go now. I think there's like 23 chapters, so who knows? We might finish in the next couple of sessions, in which case I'll come up with a short list of books I'll probably come up with a choice or two if you guys wanted to put in. I'm thinking of reading one of my Dungeons and Dragons books or something like that. Who knows, maybe I'll bite the bullet and read another Harry Potter book. And we were bound to get through it faster than we did the first time. Anyway, thank you so much for, you know, being here and coming and enjoying story time with me. I do appreciate it. But yes, for now, sleep well if it is not your bedtime. Have a great time zone. I shall see you next Monday for some more Final Fantasy VIII. In the meantime, bye bye guys. Have a good night.